Hi, I'm Johnny. This is Johnny Likes, the show where I talk about movies that I like. Today, I'm talking about a 1993 action comedy starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Today, Johnny Likes Last Action Hero. The plot: Danny Madigan is a young boy who is magically transported to the world of his favorite larger-than-life action movie hero, Jack Slater. Once there, Danny must convince Slater that he's not crazy, survive an action movie reality as a comic relief sidekick,
oh shit! I'm a comedy sidekick!
and ultimately find a way to get back to the real world. Strong start, weak ending. The first hour and a half or so of this movie is very entertaining, and I found it consistently inventive in the way that it skewers action movies and their tropes. The best parts of the movie are when we're in Slater's world, and it's just Slater and Madigan going back and forth doing action movie stuff, exchanging banter, and just generally being an odd couple.
Check this out. Someone tried to kill old man Torelli, right? Missed and shot Leo the Fart by mistake.
Right.
Wrong.
Madigan's constantly trying to convince Slater that he's in an action movie and he's a fictional character by pointing out all these different cliches that the audience is aware of.
Is another one of your movie proofs?
Maybe.
I don't want to say it.
You can't. You can't possibly say it. Because this movie is PG-13.
Slater never really buys it, but he eventually does start to come around and realizes that Madigan might not actually be crazy after all. The beginning of the film, when it's just gritty New York City, and the third act, when Slater comes into the real world, is where the film falters. Once we get to the third act and Slater does enter the real world, we're pretty much ironically left with the very thing that the movie is making fun of, a cliched and trope-filled Hollywood action movie. The screenplay. Zach Penn and Adam Leff wrote the screenplay to this movie, at least the original one. And I can't help but think that maybe they were just watching The Simpsons one night and happened to catch a McBain reference and got inspired.
Ooh, McBain. Come on, live a little, Scoy.
No, thank you. Got me a future, partner. I'm 2 days away from retirement. My daughter's graduating from college. And as soon as we nail Mendoza, my old lady and I are gonna sail around the world like we always wanted. We just christened the boat. Oh, yes, sir. Everything's gonna be just I'm not gonna make it.
Oh, stop talking crazy.
No. Just do one thing for me. Get Mendoza.
Mendoza!
Last Action Hero was supposed to be called Extreme Violence. It was originally an R-rated lampooning of violence in action movies. Somewhere along the way, though, in its many rewrites, it got turned into a PG-13 rated action comedy. In fact, the final version of the film was changed so much from the original screenplay that Penn and Leff only got credit for writing the story. They didn't even get a full screenplay credit. Ironically, Shane Black was one of the people hired on to do a rewrite. He was responsible for writing Lethal Weapon and Last Boy Scout, which is funny because that's the exact type of movies that Penn and Leff were satirizing in the original screenplay. Even though it went through a lot of changes and it had so many different voices involved, I still think that it turned out to be an original story with lots of clever insights and little bits of dialogue. The nature of reality. You could do some serious philosophizing on this movie's commentary on the nature of one's reality versus fiction. The blurred line between the two, how they reflect on each other. The movie never really tackles any of these subjects in any sort of meaningful way, which makes perfect sense. It's a big budget action comedy. I wouldn't expect it to. However, there is one thing that I want to point out that I found interesting. At around the 80-minute mark, Benedict, played by Charles Dance, is doing an expository monologue.
If that little turd, Daniel Madigan, can move through parallel worlds, I can move through parallel worlds. Impossible to catch.
If God was a villain, he'd be me.
And he's seemingly breaking the fourth wall. He's talking directly to the viewer, looking straight into camera. I'm not sure if he's talking to the viewer, us, or the viewer in Danny's world, in Madigan's world. Either way, doesn't matter. So this is the only fourth wall break in the movie that I'm aware of. And during this scene, you can actually see a little bit of camera crew reflected in the bar behind Benedict while he's doing this monologue. I'm not quite sure what to make of this. Was this just another little scene parodying villains talking too much, explaining too much of their plan for no reason? Or is it something a little bit more nuanced? If the glimpse of the camera crew was intentional, maybe the film does have more going on than it seems at first glance. If it wasn't intentional, it's still an interesting coincidence that it happens during the movie's only fourth wall break. There's more philosophical stuff that could be talked about regarding this film. Fate. What I mean by that is, would Danny already be on the Jack Slater 4 film reels that Max is showing to him? And if so, would Max be able to look ahead further on the reels and see Danny in them and see what happens? If not, what would the reels show? You guys see what I'm saying? It's just a Hollywood movie, but you can always go a little bit deeper if you want to. The meta aspect. I don't think the writers wrote this movie because they dislike the type of movies they're parodying. In fact, quite the opposite. I think that they're big fans of the movies, and this is more of a homage than a critique of them. Almost like fan fiction, like a writing exercise, with them going, what if we wrote the most generic big-budget action movie? What would that look like? And while writing that movie, they happened to break down the tropes and cliches that made those movies so successful. In doing this, they basically laid down the rules for the modern meta formula. Which is, if you're a writer and you're being formulaic, all you have to do to get away with it is to acknowledge that you know you're being formulaic. That way it makes you seem clever, and you just go ahead and do the formula anyways. Scream followed this formula, although a little bit more subtly. Deadpool did it and told us they were doing it. She-Hulk did it. The Lego Movie did it. Rick and Morty did it. At this point, the acknowledging that you're being formulaic while still being formulaic has been done so often that it's now become its own cliche. But Last Action Hero was one of the first to do it, and I think that it does it quite well and deserves some respect in that regard. Action is action. Director John McTiernan is responsible for some of the best action movies of all time, and his experience shows here. Everything about the Jack Slater world is just pitch perfect when it comes to action movies. The explosions, the stunts, the tone, the one-liners, the sets, the soundtrack. Everything about it just screams late 80s action movies. I think actually if they had made Jack Slater 4, the movie within the movie here, in real life and just played it straight, they could have released it in 1993 and it would have been a hit. I probably would have liked it. And it might have even made more money than Last Action Hero ended up making. Final thoughts and rating. I didn't see this movie when it first came out. I was a little too young to have really enjoyed it anyway. It wasn't until a few years later that I saw it all the way through. And I'm glad I did, because at that point I was old enough to have seen the movies that it was referencing and know that the magic ticket was impossible, but still young enough that the magic ticket had the yeah, but what if element for me. So pretty much I was in the sweet spot age-wise for enjoying the movie. The idea of parodying a movie is a distinction that isn't always recognized by kids. For instance, I remember seeing Hot Shots Part 2 and not realizing that this was making fun of other movies. I just thought it was just this weird, goofy, funny movie. And I think that this film can work on that same sort of level. If you aren't familiar with all of the action movies that this is making fun of, it can still just be a goofy, funny action buddy movie and just work on that level. I watch this movie fairly often, once every year or two, and it never disappoints. There are so many references and in-jokes that I catch something new pretty much every time I watch it. I genuinely enjoy the over-the-top action. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Austin O'Brien have excellent chemistry together and are a joy to watch on screen. I think it's a fine parody that suffered from too many rewrites, resulting in a messy final act that ultimately strayed pretty far from its original vision, but it's still an original story, clever, and funny. I think it still stands up very well 30 years later, and I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. The Charles Dance fourth wall break is not something that I noticed all on my own. It was pointed out in this essay that I read, which is actually a transcription of a YouTube video. I'll leave the links below in the description so you can go check it out if you want. But I just thought I would give credit where credit is due. So what did you guys think of Last Action Hero? What do you want to see me talk about next? Let me know in the comments. And if you could do me a favor and like and subscribe, that'd be great. It's quick, free, and relatively painless. Plus, it really helps me out. Thanks for watching me talk about movies for a little while, and you can tune in next time to see what else Johnny likes.